Good morning, everybody. Please keep coming in and grab seats. I am Beth Swanson, CEO of A Better Chicago, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. I am pleased to present this discussion on the Youth Opportunity Dashboard, a first-of-its-kind tool in Chicago that provides all of us who are supporting young people with a comprehensive and easy-to-use data tool that provides guidance on how young people are really faring across the city of Chicago. As many of you know, A Better Chicago is a venture philanthropy investing in access and opportunity to help Chicago's youth escape poverty. We really work to supercharge nonprofits by providing both unrestricted capital as well as management support to help them grow their impact. We are very proud of our own work, but we also recognize that our work is really necessary but not sufficient for the type of change we need to see on Chicago's landscape or the level of investment needed to support our youth to ensure they really succeed in education, career, and life. So that really brought us to the idea of this data tool and really creating a citywide resource building off of our own impact measurement work at A Better Chicago. And we wanted to better support understanding, decision-making, and collaboration among all the stakeholders, all of you here today, and more throughout the city who are supporting young people in Chicago every day. So we wanted to create a simple, easy-to-use dashboard. Think about like kind of USA Today version of data consumption. With both district-level and community-level snapshots of how young people are faring, measured by a series of 26 indicators that indicate progress towards 6 key cradle-to-career milestones that are among the most determinative in projecting a child's future. We spent about a year creating the tool, and I want to thank the Obama Foundation and the Chicago Public Education Fund for being our partners in that work as we developed it. We also spoke to dozens of nonprofits, philanthropies, universities, research partners, and also looked at other cities across the country, connected with national partners to understand best practices and the potential power of these types of tools. We formally launched the tool in December, and we are excited about the possibilities of using it to inform our own work. So it'll help us inform our future investment decisions, allowing us to better understand trends across the city or in certain communities, highlighting particular outcomes that need additional support or investment, or helping identify what's really working and helping to try to scale that to even more youth in Chicago. But beyond our specific work, it's really our goal to have everyone utilize this data, and we'd welcome your partnership in this work and moving this work forward for young people. So thank you for joining us today to learn more, and we also hope to learn from you in Q&A. We are also hosting a series of demos over the next many months and have been asked to brief a number of groups already, philanthropy, policymakers, community-based agencies across the city. We're excited to take that work on this year, and if anyone wants to just go deeper or work with our team, please reach out to any A Better Chicago staff today, and we are happy to set that up. Last, I'd like to thank Joyce Foundation, Crown Family Philanthropies, and PwC, who are all here today, for their support in making the dashboard a reality. We're truly excited to provide this resource and for our partnership and provide it for years to come. So we have an incredible panel of partners to my left, and well known to you all, so I know people want to jump in, so I'm not going to give the big bio for everyone. I know, except for Stephanie. I'm going to go deep. It's going to be 20 minutes on Stephanie. We have Marshall Hatch Jr., CEO of the MAAFA Redemption Project and leader within A Better Chicago's portfolio. We have Michael Strautmanis, Obama Foundation's Executive Vice President for External Affairs, Ric Estrada, CEO of Metropolitan Family Services and A Better Chicago board member. Jennifer Blatz, President and CEO of StriveTogether, who her last speaking gig was in Davos. So we're very excited. She's here for our little announcement. And Stephanie Banchero, who will be our moderator today, is the Director of Education and Economic Mobility at the Joyce Foundation. Before turning to the panel, I want to introduce one more person, Onel Abreu, who is our leader of data and impact at A Better Chicago. Onel will provide us a brief demo of the tool. Panel will follow. We'll close with brief Q&A. And again, thank you all for being here. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Beth. Thank you to all of you for coming this morning. Before I dive into the tool, I wanted to first key us up by saying Chicago is very data rich. We all know that. There are similar dashboards out there to the one that we're presenting today, but we wanted to make sure that we're clear on our dashboard serving as a complement rather than a replacement to all those other dashboards out there. One of the ways that we wanted to differentiate our dashboard was to be able to allow users to hone in on one specific area of focus. Specifically for our purposes, we wanted users to be able to choose between any age group from cradle to career, as Beth mentioned, so we can understand educational outcomes for that group. So to guide us through today, I'm going to basically take the role of a nonprofit leader in the K-8 space who delivers or tries to attempt to deliver high dosage tutoring to students in different communities in Chicago. So if I were that user, one of the first things that I would do when I get to our website, and as you can see here, these are the 6 milestones and the 6 age groups we're talking about, is try to see where do I want to dig in a little bit further. We see here milestone 1. Each milestone has like a little help tool to basically tell us what's in there. And I can go through each one to figure out which one makes the most sense for me. Again, because I'm dealing with tutoring K-8, I think this might be the one for me. I'm looking at meeting benchmarks in reading and math, and it looks like this is working from K-8, so that matches what I would like to look into. So the first thing I'm going to do here is now look at the different indicators. Again, there are 26 across all the milestones, but for our purposes, I want to make sure we note we have divided those indicators into primary and secondary ones. Primary being kind of like the actual end goal or the outcomes we want to push and improve upon, and then secondary indicators kind of inform and give us more context as to what's happening that might be leading to those primary indicators. Again, as a leader in tutoring, we focus on literacy. And so I think that I want to jump into the 3rd grade language and see how things are shaping up. So again, because we want this to be a focus on community outcomes, the next step is going to be then choose a community. My organization focuses on students in East Garfield Park, so I'll make that as my next selection. And what we get is a dynamic set of 3 elements that I'll show you here. Again, if I'm curious about what this actual outcome is about, to get more information, there's more help text here to, again, talk about who we're representing here. As a note, before I dive in, when we talk about school-based outcomes, this is all publicly available information. And so we're only really talking about students who attend schools in this community, so I want to make sure that distinction is very clear. If we had a data sharing agreement, we'd be able to track where students specifically are for these outcomes. But for right now, this is just school-based outcomes. So that being said, again, as a leader of this organization, East Garfield Park, I'm noticing a few things. A data chart, in this case, it's a line chart that's showcasing for the last 4 to 5 years what community outcomes look like in this indicator, and then what Chicago outcomes also look like across the board. We're seeing then a heat map that is going to be dynamic to, again, showcase how the different 77 communities are doing on this outcome across the city. And then lastly, we'll see a nice little quick synopsis of what's happening as of this current year. So for at least 2022, I'm already noticing that the trend is that this past year's worth of data, we are technically trending down compared to the last 4 years. So that's already a proof point for me as a leader of this organization to think, hey, the work that we're doing is important in this community. We have a lot to work on here. So as you can see here in the blue, we have 16.1% of students are proficient in reading for this past year. Again, one thing that I will notice from my specific example is when my organization deployed in East Garfield Park, we deployed in 2021, serving 30% of schools there. So this actually might be a great proof point for me to present this data to funders, because as you can see here, we're only at 30% of schools across East Garfield Park, but in 1 year, we've already increased 3 percentage points in terms of this outcome. So again, this is something I might present to a board or to other funders to give more funding or more support to our initiative or to our intervention. The other thing I can do outside of that is kind of think through potentially like what do other communities around the one that I serve, how are they doing this outcome? So I can utilize this heat map as well to then check and say, okay, where might I want to expand in terms of the work that we do with tutoring. And one of the things that say our staff is talking about is that a lot of our families are starting to come from Humboldt Park. And so I might look at their proficiency and see that they're 6.8%. Again, if I want, I can keep playing around with this and actually look at Humboldt Park. And see that this is definitely an area that I might want to expand upon to, again, change this curve to be more positive over time. So again, this is just one potential example of all the different things that potential stakeholders could use this tool for. One of the things that even our team internally realized as we were working through some of our social emotional learning work was that as we looked at some of the data around keeping youth on track and giving them second chances, we looked at school exclusionary discipline and noticed that while many academic indicators from the pandemic definitely went down and have been having trouble coming back up, the one that didn't go down was actually out-of-school suspensions. And so we're actually digging into this a little bit further, but that actually increased in some West and South Side neighborhoods since the pandemic. So that's just another example of ways that we might want to utilize this to inform some game and action planning across different organizations. As for improvements, we know we want to add a number of new features. I know that the elected school board is coming up, and so one thing we would like to do is add an overlay to this map so we can see, per the district, once those maps are finalized, what can the members of that board do to kind of like game plan and help think about what targeted supports we can provide for their districts. And then we also want to improve core features like our heat map. In the example I gave around trying to expand or trying to see where our impact is having the greatest work, I might want to see when I hover over this tool what the schools are in this community that this data is based upon. And so one of the improvements we want to make is to, again, give more community context as to what you're seeing for each community. Overall, I will say that we have over 25 different sources that we're taking this data from to and through, CPS and ISB. And so they all have their own timelines where they're updating this data. So we're hoping to do this refresh for data twice a year. In about a month, you'll see 2023 data for a number of these indicators. And then in closing, I'll say, one, thank you again for allowing us to share this tool with all of you. We're really excited to kind of dig in ourselves and you guys as collaborators to unearth some more insights. And again, help focus on our youth and the outcomes that we know we can improve. If you have any questions at the end, please, you have note cards in front of you and pens, please write them out. And towards the end, during the Q&A, we'll pick those up and I try to answer those questions as best as possible. So again, thank you all for coming and see you all soon. Thank you.
Me now? Oh. Well, good morning, everybody. I just want to say that we are very happy and proud to support this. I mean, there is a lot of data out there, but organizing the data, I think, is really tough. And I love, like, a really good example of that is you show, oh, you can't see it, but both growth and proficiency. I just think that's so thoughtful because for the longest time, we thought only about proficiency, and thinking about growth is important, but so is proficiency. So it's just so well thought out. All right, so let's turn to our panelists. Jennifer, let me just start with you. For those who don't know, can you just say a little bit about Strive?
Yes, so it's great to be here. First and foremost, thank you for having me. And wow, what a great showing to see a database. We love data at StriveTogether. So I will say, when I was like, wow, you got this many people to come see data, this is a great start. So StriveTogether is a national network. We support 71 communities across the country to improve mobility outcomes. So we're working to put more young people on a path to economic mobility. We actually work with these community partnerships. These are cross-sector partnerships working to track, measure, starting at kindergarten readiness all the way through employment. So seeing a database like this is exciting, especially exciting to me since our work is very much grounded in using data to drive improvement. Those outcomes and indicators that you're tracking and that communities across our national network are tracking are the proxy indicators for whether or not a young person is on a path to economic mobility. And as I'm sure you all know, given the work you do and given that you're here for breakfast to see data, you know that economic mobility has been declining since the 1940s in the United States. And as Beth mentioned, I was in Davos and had a chance to talk with people across the world, and they couldn't believe that. That is happening in the United States. And so this is important work, and it's great to be here and great to learn with you and share with you what we're learning from our network across the country.
Yeah, so let's do that. Why don't you give a few examples of how, since you guys have been at this for so long, in places where it's been used and used well, and I actually think one might be Austin, where I was yesterday, but any examples you want to give would be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I definitely love to talk about the work in Texas because, again, you think about about economic mobility and going to the massive changes at a place like Texas, it's not your first thought of places. So I'll start with Austin. We have a partnership there called E3 Alliance. It's a cross-sector cradle-to-career partnership. They have put together data sharing agreements with higher ed institutions and school districts throughout Central Texas, and had those in place for years. And as they started digging deeper into the data, and so one thing I definitely want to say is this is an amazing database. I love it. It's easy to read, easy to dig into, and as you all know, you have to dig deeper and beneath kind of the surface to get to what are those trend lines that we're seeing, what's underneath that, and what's going on there. Looking for both bright spots and looking at where are there gaps. And so in Austin, in Central Texas, they started to dig really into their 8th grade math data, because 8th grade math, taking an advanced 8th grade math courses is a key predictor of college success. It's like the #1 predictor. And no surprises, they started to dig in and disaggregate that data by race and socioeconomic indicators. They realized that there were huge gaps in terms of who was even taking advanced 8th grade math pathways. And so they tried something. They did a institutional policy switch to start, and they actually you have to now opt out of 8th grade math, of advanced 8th grade math pathways in 12 school districts is where they started. And they realized they quickly started to close the achievement gap. They started to close the opportunity gap. They actually have closed it by 85%. And what that shows there is the implicit bias of tracking students of color out of advanced math pathways. And they wouldn't have had that had they not looked at, okay, here's the trend line data, and then let's dig deeper. Let's look at what's the root cause here, and actually it's implicit bias. So they now have an opt-out policy, meaning you're going to be put in advanced math classes if you've demonstrated readiness, and they've closed that gap. And then they used that institutional policy change to change state policy. And now throughout they were able to pass a policy last year where this kind of opt-out of advanced math pathways is the policy for the state of Texas. And so that's just an example of how you'd start with the trend lines, dig into the data, and really uncover what's going on, and then change policy to get to population level outcomes.
Can you just say, well, like one step more about, so you have the data, then you have somebody that's organizing the data, but then everybody has to come together. People have to meet,
Yes.
That next step, I think, is where sometimes people can get stuck.
Yeah.
Say a little bit about how that happened.
Yeah, so I mean, our work at StriveTogether is to build these cross-sector partnerships who really bring together education, the education community, human services, business, philanthropy, and others to create a shared vision and build trust of, and an agreement that we're going to use data as a flashlight, not a hammer. We're not going to use it to bang the district for not getting these outcomes. We're going, and I have to say that quote is, I always credit Amy Gadara. She used to run the data quality campaign, but it is one of my favorite things to say is that's really what you have to do. You have to build the trust and sit down with the data. And also sit down with the data with those who are most impacted by systems. We know that, so we're talking about parents, residents. We talk about democratizing data. So we're very data driven. What our role at StriveTogether is to give communities the tools to do this. Over the years, we have definitely done work here in Chicago, most recently with Thrive Chicago. We know Chicago is, as a large metropolitan, large city, you have so many tables across the community who are using this data. Onel mentioned the existing databases. But it is about coming together around a shared vision for improving economic mobility and an agreement of how you're going to use the data. That's what we see work in communities. That's what worked in Austin, Texas, and then in our other places across Texas where we have cross-sector partnerships to kind of take up that policy. So that's the kind of adaptive challenge of this database is a very technical solution. It's amazing. It's where you start. But the adaptive challenge of building trust within a community for how you're going to use that data for improvement, that's much harder. Yeah. And I see it happening across Chicago and across the country.
So Ric, I just want to start by saying that Ric is going to have to leave early. So if he gets up and walks out, it's not because he's offended by my questions. It's that he has to leave early.
But I'm not a
He might be offended by my questions, but so Rick, so you're on the ABC board, and you've been a big proponent of this. Can you say a little bit about how and why? Well, let's start with why. Why you think it's an important thing in Chicago, and then maybe say a little bit about how Metropolitan Family Services could potentially use the results coming out of the dashboard.
Sure. Well, thanks for allowing me to join this panel. I think everybody here, except for Jennifer, we've been on panels before and spoken about this kind of stuff, so I'm a proud member of the board of ABC. Beth and I have been talking about this kind of stuff. I know, maybe I'm a little bit older than you, a lot older than you, but a long time. Chicago Allies for Youth Success and Thrive Chicago, and then initiatives before that. There'll be initiatives after that, and I think it's been kind of like the holy grail to just get a database that makes sense for everyone, not just for the school district, not just for the nonprofits, not only for philanthropy, but that makes sense for everyone. So the reason I'm here, the reason we're talking about this is because we need to make that a reality. And this is just the start. I mean, what we saw is it's complicated on the back end, but basic on the front end. And you can see over years we're going to have a timeline that we could really talk about data, and we're going to improve it. I mean, that's the most important thing, that the staff here at ABC is super talented. They care. They're from these communities, and this is going to be improved. So I think just one, I'm from Chicago. I've raised kids in Chicago. I still live in Chicago. My kids were in Chicago public schools. The work of my organization is primarily in Chicago, so that's why we're doing it. But you didn't ask me this question, but we talked about
You can't answer.
I'm offended. I'm leaving.
I'm just going to answer the question I want.
But the question I want is when we talked about those third grade reading scores, eighth grade math scores, so we think about them as leading indicators for future educational attainment and economic success, because it's also about economic success. You know, in Chicago, I started out as an early childhood guy, and you know, we always talk about third grade scores, right? Third grade scores, single leading indicator for, if you look at third grade scores, you're likely going to see how your child is going to do in seventh grade, that important test that then determines high schools and other stuff. If they do well, you're likely know what they're going to do on the ACT, SAT. If they do well there, you're likely going to know what they're going to do on future GRE stuff, that kind of stuff. So it's important. But then we don't talk about on the economic mobility side, another equally important data point that we don't have yet is mothers' educational attainment. That's a leading indicator. So as we develop programs, so how are we going to solve for that? So that's a question that we at ABC and the rest of the foundations here, the government, policymakers, well, I don't believe in policy, but I think we're the policymakers. They kind of implement or determine policies. But how are we going to address for that? So anyway, more questions.
Well, one thing you said when we talked last week is that this is about the questions that we ask as much as the answers that we get.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting. I think you're sort of hinting at that. Just say a little bit more about that, thinking about it's about the questions that we're asking.
Like with all data, right? Whether it's on the corporate side where you're looking at financial numbers and indicators, or this data, the data is just that. But what are you learning from it? What are the questions that you're going to ask? And as you're developing, let's say, mentoring programs, and you have to take into account all that data, kind of your lived experience. You think about, again, mother's educational attainment. So how do you develop a best-in-class mentoring program where it's not really necessarily about the academic side of it, but about the relationship building side of it to kind of help solve for X, whatever X is. So for me, it's all about the questions that improve your program, that will improve delivery, that will improve outcomes for children and young people.
Yep. So, Michael, let's turn to you. At the Obama Foundation, you guys are big on data, and I think these are basically the metrics you guys are using.
Yeah.
Can you just say a little bit about just sort of overall how you think about data and using data for improvements? And then also, I'm really curious to your point about which metrics, because if you're thinking about lifting people out of poverty, there's a million metrics you could
Right.
pick, so you're going to have to settle on some. So talk a little bit first about how you guys sort of think and use data, and then secondly about the specific metrics, why these ones?
Well, I think I'll start by just, because I was turning this way to pay attention, I spent a lot of time reminding myself just how important Beth Swanson is to this work. And she's, a very inspiring and motivating leader. She just sort of has been about it, as you've noticed, for a long time. And has an optimism that pulls itself into this insistence that we can do better. And having this as a part of that vision, having worked in government, one of the more difficult things for anyone in government to do is to display failure. And we all know failure exists. Failure exists in any enterprise. And one of the things that's axiomatic is failure is an opportunity to learn. And so one of the areas that has been important, and I actually got this from working closely with President Obama, is in many ways, although he's known as a very positive, hopeful guy, I know you have heard this whole thing about hope, in spending time with him, when we're talking about making decisions, he's relentlessly focused on what's wrong and what's not working, trying to get the information about it so that we can make decisions. And so you're right, the points that are here come out of work that took place in the White House, in the federal government, after George Zimmerman was exonerated from killing Trayvon Martin. And President Obama asked the government to look at data for youth outcomes, for success, and disaggregated by race and class. And what we found was that boys and young men of color were at the bottom of every good statistic and at the top of every bad statistic. And from that came My Brother's Keeper. And what we've learned from My Brother's Keeper is that group also becomes a little bit of the canary in the coal mine. What we find is that what happens to young men of color in our communities ends up happening to all young people in these communities. And I think the pandemic proved that as we saw outcomes dip and crater across all different perspectives, but some communities had seen that before. What we want to do with the data as the My Brother's Keeper work moved into the Obama Foundation is really use and push, and our friends at StriveTogether has been a part of this, A Better Chicago has been a part of this, which is, can we get public sector, private sector, community leaders, nonprofit leaders, community members themselves. You think about, for example, entering school ready to learn. And you saw this in Tulsa. And what we found is that if you have all of the different parts of the ecosystem, daycare providers, early childhood experts, Head Start, parents, government, school superintendents, all deciding, hey, we're going to, after looking at the data, move the needle on and improve enrollment in preschool in the community. Then you can say to yourself, as you look at it, okay, this is working. Can we go talk to these people, bring them into the center of this discussion, and find out what they're doing that's working? And what we've found is that all of a sudden that dialogue shifts I think it was using data as a tool, not a hammer.
Yeah.
Shifts the dialogue from a defensive, let's kind of hide what's happening so we can protect what we're doing because we know our community needs these resources, to, oh, that's working, can we have that here? And once you have a community demand that something is working here, that motivates policymakers who are at the table, elected officials who are at the table, who know that if I bring that here, these people are going to be happy with me and we're going to have outcomes. And so that's the dialogue we're seeking to drive in our My Brother's Keeper communities around the country. And in Chicago, we've decided that our greatest responsibility is to the neighborhoods around the Presidential Center. And so to say we are going deep in those communities, like I know who the third grade teachers are in South Shore. And so that dialogue has been very encouraging to me, because it shows me something that I've known, which is that everybody that doesn't care about our young people has now had opportunities to exit. The only people that are left are the people who want to be there. Everybody else is gone and had opportunities to leave. And so I think I want to kind of help flip the dialogue in Chicago to one which is we focus a lot on our problems here, and I get it. We got a lot of problems, and I appreciate it. I think that I would love to have people use data to start talking about what works and trying to expand and deepen and focus. And I'd like to have some what works unicorns out of Chicago. That'd be great.
Well, I think we're going to have that. I just want to say, I'm not going to point out a person, but there is a reporter in the room here, and I won't point that person out. I think, I'll just say Chalkbeat is here, and they've done a good job, I think, of focusing on what works. As a former reporter, one thing I think can be a problem is that when I was at the Tribune, we had 13 education reporters. There's like half a reporter at the Tribune right now.
Yeah.
We just do not have as much coverage, and so when you don't have as much coverage and you're sort of kneecapped, you're basically just responding to, oh my God, I got to put out this fire. So there's not very much time to sort of highlight the bright spots. I think we just need a lot more of that. It's all going to be on Becky. Marshall, let's
Right.
turn to you. First, say a little bit about MAAFA. Am I saying that right?
Yep.
Yeah. Just say a little bit about MAAFA.
Sure. First, I'll say I may have to leave early too. My wife is due any.
Oh my God.
If I run out, I'm not going to the bathroom.
Wow, that's dedication.
So, the MAAFA Redemption Project is a ministry of New Mount Pilgrim Missionary Baptist Church in West Garfield Park. I know we saw some data in East Garfield Park, and I'll highlight what I found on the dashboard in West Garfield Park. Celebrating 30 years in that community, actually. And MAAFA was founded in 2017 to target the population of young men ages 18 to 24 who were disconnected. And so housing, workforce development, mental health support, spiritual life coaching is something that I think is the lifeblood of what we do, because we're not shy about being a ministry. And what I found on the dashboard is that there has been a 50% increase in out-of-school suspensions from 2020 to 2022. There's a 25% increase in youth homelessness, not to speak of youth unemployment. Like, all of these data points tell a story. They don't tell the story. Right, and so just to pick up on something that Mike shared, I think it's important for a community like West Garfield Park to see these data and understand the context that informs that data, because that context helps us to shape the solutions. So West Garfield Park, it's one of the youngest neighborhoods in the city. I think almost 60% of West Garfield Park's 16,000 residents are under the age of 35, has tremendous potential. But in 2020, during the pandemic, it led CPS in expulsions. And I'm sure we all are familiar with the school to prison pipeline, the connection between education and criminal justice, how third grade reading and math scores are used to predict how many prisons to build, right? So this is catastrophic, essentially, for a neighborhood like West Garfield Park. But again, it doesn't define us. I think it should be the motor that organizes us. And so, to another theme that Mike highlighted, I think we're interested in using these data to organize legacy residents in particular, who are already being organized, because there's a lot of fear about displacement and gentrification as, a lot of capital projects come to West Garfield Park. And so legacy residents have been organizing around affordable housing so that folks can stay there. And of course, that informs policy too. And so MAAFA has really been one of the organizations to create a table of community-based organizations called the Garfield Park Right to Wellness Collaborative. And last year we actually won the Chicago Prize, which is a $10 million gift to restore a neighborhood. And so my larger point is that we need to create a comprehensive vision so that once we sit down with young folks and their parents and community stakeholders to show these data, we're not discouraged by it, but we're motivated by it.
You know, the phrase that I think of that has stuck with me when I think about the work that you're doing, Marshall, is what you're doing is you're moving from program excellence to population level change. And I think I have been a part of focusing a dialogue when it comes to our work in communities around program excellence and wanting to have amazing programs. And I think what I found and the lesson that I've learned is that program excellence isn't enough. And what you're doing is you're organizing people around, having population level change, and it's really exciting.
Just really quick to that point, and you should copyright that before I steal it. You're absolutely right. So focusing on perfecting programs around direct service and even ministry, that's one thing. But without a larger vision of community development, it's really like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Yeah. And so they have to go hand in hand for the young people themselves to be inspired by what's coming.
I feel like there's so many quotes up here. If I were a reporter, Band-Aid on a bullet wound, flashlight, not a hammer.
Flashlight.
Can someone give me a time check? Do I still have more time to keep? Okay, yep. So I think this point about I'm going to super simplify it, but first you need the data. Okay, we have data. Maybe not all of it, but we have plenty. Somebody needs to organize it. And then you need to use it to motivate people into action. And as people have noted, this is not the first time or not the first dashboard in Chicago where people have tried to organize people. And it's really complicated, Michael, to organize you divided, the civic community, the philanthropic community, the community itself. There's turf wars. I mean that in the nicest sense. There's different interests across those. So I would love all of you just to talk about, okay, we've made a couple steps here, but we still have a long way to go in taking this data and organizing people for good, not just improving one program. That's the hard part. Not that what you've done so far isn't hard, but we got a bigger hill to climb. Just talk a little bit about what we all could be doing in the room, where you've seen it work. Any advice you could give. I'd love to hear. Anybody.
I you use the word turf, and I talk about turf all the time. And let me just tell you how it's so deeply embedded in the fabric of Chicago. So we call ourselves the city of neighborhoods, right? And we take great pride in these beautiful neighborhoods. They have a certain kind of element, flavor to them, and that's the good news. The bad news is it's also the city of turf, and it's not just about neighborhoods and the race, class, and all their socioeconomic issues within neighborhoods, but it's also, you could translate that into philanthropy. Philanthropy has their own turf. Government, we know clearly in this town that elected officials have deep turf issues. And that goes into the nonprofit sector, into every single sector. So when you think about the city of neighborhoods, also think about the city of turf. So how is that going to impact the work of collecting data? Because CPS has turf, and when they get hammered by something that should have been a flashlight, then they overcorrect, and now you can't have the data. So all of this, I think, we need to look at our ethos within the city, our DNA, and understand that what ABC is trying to accomplish still has lots of challenges. And there's, even when we have a data sharing agreement, it could be pulled if something is hammered at the public level. Because, and again, it should have been a flashlight used for the good of community, but now, okay, we're done with that because you put a flashlight on it. And so, for me, it's both a warning, but also an opportunity that we need to, thank you for that quote, that used that flashlight.
Can I build on, and it's what you're saying, Rick, and also what you said, Mike. I mean, it's what we've all said is it is really about finding the bright spots. We can all look at that data and we can look at the trend lines, and particularly after the pandemic, see what feels like, especially if you look across multiple indicators and multiple outcomes, some kind of insurmountable challenge to move these things. And yet, Onel, when you shared the data on early grade literacy, you saw a trend line going up. And so why is it going up? What's going on? What is that intervention? This gets to like the programs, program excellence to systems. Like how do you scale excellent programs? So in one of our partnerships, the Commit partnership in Dallas, Texas, they look at the data and they find those bright spots, and then they create hope charts. They call them hope charts, and they use these hope charts in the community to show, okay, this school, this is what they're seeing. This was an intervention. It might only impact 100 kids or 30 kids, but when you dig into that data, sometimes it's only 200 young people that we have to figure out how to get moving to be able to move that whole indicator and that outcome. So it is going to require digging deeper into the data and really creating those hope charts and having conversations at all levels in the community about those hope charts and looking at how do we take those bright spots, whether it's a program intervention, whether it's a combination of interventions in a neighborhood, at the deep neighborhood in the community level, and take those to scale.
I would ask us to fund and celebrate and support the conveners. You can't have people come together in the way I described unless somebody is spending the time, and ABC's done a great job of this, spending the time convening them. Find the trusted conveners in a community. We have one right in front of us here. And support them so that there's a table that people can come to, put their particular programmatic needs and intentionality aside for an hour and come and talk about what's working and what's not and what their focus is going to be. Because if you have them in a competition for dollars around the services they're providing, they can't put that aside because they're struggling, right? If you're doing affordable housing in Garfield Park, you're underwater, right? And the people that you're dealing with are suffering every day. Mm-hmm. So you can't put that aside if you're in a situation where I've got to compete for dollars with somebody else. I'm gonna be polite about it, maybe, but I can't just sit and focus on the data itself. I can't spend an hour figuring out what the convening is gonna look like, and 3 hours trying to make sure everybody is at the table, and another hour trying to make sure the person who was offended the last time we had the discussion actually is willing to come back. So that convening that is incredibly important. There are people who do that. Find them, give them the resources so that they can do it well, and let's have excellence around that as well, because we all know what a good convening and a good convener looks like, and give them the tools to be able to do that.
I just want to emphasize, I cannot emphasize that enough. Thank you, Mike, for raising that. I realized as you were talking, I'm sharing, what you should do, but not how. And this does require infrastructure in communities. When I share what's happening in Austin at E3 Alliance, what happens at Commit, and in what happens in Tulsa with Impact Tulsa, these are conveners who are not doing the work that you're doing on the ground every day, Marshall. They're convening the conversations with partners like you in the neighborhoods, with the residents to look at the data and doing the follow-up, as Mike mentioned. It does require resources. It requires investment. The return on investment is tenfold when you get those outcomes improving, but it absolutely requires that. And the other thing I'll say is StriveTogether, after doing this over the last decade plus, we have consolidated the lessons learned and the trainings that we do in capacity and capability building. We've created a set of coursework, and any of you who are doing this work in communities, it's open source, it's free, it's available in the training hub at StriveTogether. You don't have to be a part of our national network to access these courses, and it's just how you use data to drive improvement based on these places. So that's available, but you have to have the manpower, the the person powered to be able to do this work.
So
Just really quick, I'm
we're
sorry.
going to open up to questions, but yeah, let Marshall.
Yeah, I promise.
No, go.
But I do think it's important for this convening. Use the term democratizing data. I think what's needed is really a democratization of who controls the conversation around data. Yeah. There's so much distrust when it comes to data from my experience on the ground, because there's a lingering suspicion of what's behind the data.
Yeah.
Is it money? Is it whatever? And so in our experience with A Better Chicago, this is what we brought to them maybe 3+ years ago. Our complaint was that we're being pushed by some of these funders to measure what we're doing in this way. What we're actually doing should be measured in this way. And so they helped us create really a data infrastructure that is so aligned with what we believe. And I think if we were actually able to not be gatekeepers of data, right? Not protect it for our own interests and all of that, but just to really be concerned about the change on the ground. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point.
I have to. I'm not because I don't want to answer questions, but I'm not having a baby, but I do have a board meeting. And I still need a job. So I got to go.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to open it up to questions.
Board
Is there
meetings are at least more predictable.
Thanks.
Should people just stand up and ask their question? Is that okay? Or?
That's okay too. I've got one here.
Oh, does anybody just want to stand up and ask a question? Michael.
Morning, everyone.
Talk loud.
Good morning, everyone. Because the research shows many data use approaches under-conceptualize the sense-making demands for users of data, how do you envision supporting users to ask good questions, avoid deficit assumptions, and not prematurely jump to conclusions that lead to unproductive sort of decisions?
Asked by a researcher. Anybody want to take that?
I mean, I would say I would definitely agree with that, and it requires capacity building and training to really use data in this way, using data as a flashlight. That's why we have invested in creating these training hub courses. They're insufficient, they're not enough. They're for partnerships who are trying to make sense of this, the training hub courses, which are excellent and kind of giving the tools, they're online. We also do bring cohorts of people together to talk about how they're using data and share best practices to get to those exactly the kind of concerns that you have, because data can definitely be misused. Data and where the data comes from and the distrust around the data is real in communities. So we've worked to build capacity, and there's additional work that I think could be done.
Yeah, I think in Chicago in particular, there is an opportunity for the, maybe this is, I described the social impact sector to drive a narrative around data. I think there's enough interconnectivity. I mean, you just look at this panel. We've all worked together in different ways. I think we're well networked as a sector, and I don't think the sector has leveraged its power really to insist upon a different way of highlighting and driving and tackling decisions that are made. We're often, I find, operating from a position of weakness and deficit, and I think there's enough collective power to insist upon something different. And what I've seen is I've gone around in places like Yonkers, New York, where the high school infrastructure, in partnership with the New York State of Education, just decided that a particular outcome around high school graduation rates were unacceptable, and they were going to focus relentlessly and do something about it. And then I think because people want to be associated with success and what's working, they were able to drive, again, not just the highlight of, and this has been something I've been guilty of, the highlight of an individual child who has overcome and is incredibly inspiring. And you all have seen our videos. Maybe they at some point my thing is you want to make people almost cry. Make people actually cry, and that can move us away from the interventions that need to happen in order to move things again at a population level. So I ended up repeating myself, but that's my advice.
Well, yeah, the only other thing I'll add is just adopt a spirit of humility and naivete, and be courageous enough to challenge your assumptions around the data. I was struck by Sister Liz Dozier. I think it was an impact report a couple of years ago. Chicago Beyond had a young man with locks on the front of it. And I think the question was, why am I always being studied?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think if you have that image in the back of your mind, as you approach data, it would be helpful.
Yeah, that was a powerful piece. I'm going to just read a question, unless this is about mother's educational attainment, unless the asker wants to ask themselves. No? Okay, I'll ask it. When thinking about mother's educational attainment on student success, this might be for Beth, are you defining educational attainment as formal education? How do you correct for that? Does the PK-20 system have a responsibility to correct for those gaps? Who asked this question?
We unfortunately don't capture that. That was brought up by Rick, saying that would be a great predictor to think
Okay.
about. So I apologize for we don't.
Rick's instincts are impeccable.
And then
Just
I have to
before
leave.
the mother's education question was asked. That's why he is who he is.
I don't.
Yeah, one thing I would say about this is sort of, I'm going to speak as an uneducated person who hasn't gathered data, is in some ways, to Rick's point about the questions that you're asking, in some ways, you can only collect the data, you can only analyze the data as it's collected. So if this is not how it's collected, you're sort of stuck there unless you
But
advocate
asking the
for a
question
different correct.
actually drives
Yeah.
the collection. So
Yeah,
if there is an insistence that we want to understand this question, then people will get you what they have, and then communities can insist upon a different or funders can insist upon a different set of data points.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is after years of sort of organizing ourselves around those cradle to career outcomes, and we recognized probably far too late that we couldn't only ask communities to look at these cradle to career outcomes. We had to build their capacity to look at systems indicators. What is the availability of affordable housing in the community? Like what has been the systemic disinvestment in this particular neighborhood, and what does that look like, and how does that show up in the data? So I do think educational attainment, above and beyond of like the young people that we're looking at these kind of systems indicators, I definitely see that in the database. I think there maybe, I don't know if they were contributing indicators or another set of indicators, they're there, but that's very important. These data are a start, not a standalone to what's happening in the neighborhood and what's happening in the community.
Anybody else? Don't be shy.
I think you have one more question in there.
Yeah, just wondering. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, sorry. I would love guidance from the panel. Like you so well said, say this need for funding of conveners and convening capacity. Like, how do we make that case to funders locally? So I think we as a city have struggled for a long time to actually fund not programs. We like funding program excellence, but we haven't done a great job of funding the infrastructure around that. So we'd love some either examples from other StriveTogether communities. How would you make the case locally in a neighborhood? How do you make the case across the city to actually provide that support? I think that's a huge gap for us.
I'll tell you the case that I'm making. We'll see if it works. But you want to talk about what's worked in your other StriveTogether communities to get people to fund these convenings?
I mean, this is a struggle in every community across the United States. There are a set of, it's actually taken a lot of national investment, which has been more recent. Some national investors who have come together to really, we're piecemealing together funding, I would say, in communities for infrastructure for such a long time. And now with Balmer Group and Blue Meridian Partners and others, recognizing that you cannot get to population level impact without investing in the conveners to really look across programs and make sure that we're spreading practices and getting to systems change and what we call systems transformation. That's the type of investment it takes. Now, I spend a lot of my time traveling around the country in places trying to make the case and showing examples of how, telling the story like in Austin or in Dallas or in Tulsa about how investing in infrastructure, which is often a modest infrastructure investment, can lead to tenfold the impact that any standalone programs can, because you're getting the population level impact. It's a story that we've struggled to tell, and it's a story we're continuing. We at StriveTogether, that's really the story I'm telling, but it's not unique to Chicago that you are program rich and systems poor. That's another quote that we use a lot in our work. But you cannot, if programs were the only answer, if it weren't about both ends, you wouldn't see the trend lines that you see. So it is really making the case with your investors. We're not getting the change we want to see at a population level. This is what can work, and looking at those examples from across the country.
I think we've seen this in violence interruption. And because of that, the violence interruption work in Chicago has been exported elsewhere, and it's become something that is just the dialogue around it. As you think about violence interruption, you kind of know people understand it now, whereas maybe I don't know, as early as like 5 or 10 years ago, I don't think anyone at a general level who's doing social impact work would know what that was, beyond the people who are in it every day. And at least I'm starting to go to places like the Civic Committee, the Economic Club, World Business Chicago, because again, I think despite the dialogue, the people who stayed here are committed. We have a kind of an attitude about Chicago and about the fact that we're here, and it may be other people could choose to leave, but we've chosen to stay, despite the fact that it's 1 degree outside, and that whole thing. And I think what we can hopefully do is insist, because I think what I've found is true, that we're not the only community in the only major city struggling with this question, that this can be an area that we can lead in. The amount of resources in Chicago that are already here and on their way from the federal and state government is the kind of resources that people have been begging for in order to transform outcomes. The public dollars are on their way and they're here. And so the question to me is, what are we going to do with it? Are we gonna do the same thing with that level of scale? Because I actually don't think that program excellence can even absorb successfully that amount of money. Yeah. And so are we gonna bankrupt a bunch of poor nonprofit leaders and overwhelm them and have them running around trying to put the infrastructure together to take on $500,000 in a particular thing? Or are we going to create the systems and the infrastructure to be able to take advantage of that? And I think we're a community, again, because of the focus of Governor Pritzker, the focus of our municipal government, the focus of the federal government. I think we have the opportunity to do something differently. So that's going to be my pitch. We'll see how it works.
Let us know how it works. All right, I think we have time for one last question. One, anyway, we have to move quickly, yeah. Can you share your thoughts on how to use data responsibly so it doesn't incentivize narrow, reductive solutions? Marshall, what?
Yeah. Maybe I'll combine answering this question with the previous question, just around understanding that these issues that we're talking about should be approached comprehensively and holistically. And in order in order to do that, you have to be proximate to it. You can't do it from, your ivory tower. So when King moved to Chicago to kind of nationalize the movement, he was invited by Al Raby, Coordinating Council of Community Organizations based in East Garfield Park. He moved to 16th and Hamlin, and only from there was he able to see that, wow, we're talking about ending slums and housing, but it's connected to all of these other issues. And so that's what I would encourage, I think, the business community to do. Maybe move to the west side. We'll be neighbors. I think the second question, I'll just reiterate what I said before, just this posture of naivete and humility and being in community that challenges you to challenge your presuppositions and assumptions.
I think that's a very good place to end, challenging us. I like that. So let's thank our panelists. And
So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming today. We're so glad that you're here. There was a question about how to access our Youth Opportunity Dashboard. It is on our website. It is free. There's an optional sign up, so we'd love to know who's using it, so please go ahead and do the sign up. But it is available, it's free, a corporation, nonprofit, anyone can use it. Okay?
Awesome.
And lastly, there was a question about mental health as well, and on your seat, that question was just really timely, because on your seat we have a wonderful piece of research that our team did last year that surveyed youth about mental health and just their general outlook about Chicago and their future. So please take a look at that, and there's an op-ed from Beth at the end where she talks specifically about mental health solutions that are working. So thank you again for coming today, and
think about the mental health. Yeah. If anybody is a Twitter or X, I guess, person, which I am, Elmo asked a question 2 days ago to send out a question that said, just wondering how everybody is doing. And over 180 million impressions of people looking at it and responding, basically like, not good, was what the answer was. So
he retweeted.
yeah,
I'm
all
so
these
glad
mental health solutions,
It's
and
like,
yeah.
I'm so glad I asked my friends,
Yeah,
and people
yeah.
should be asking one another
Yeah.
how they're doing, and they're trying to now get people to be more interactive
Yeah.
with mental health
Yeah.
issues. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, you should look at Google.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, sorry. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.